The man by the door was a bright Monday morning in downtown Los Angeles. The tall glass building of AltaView Holdings shimmered in the sunlight, a symbol of power, wealth, and ruthless ambition. Dozens of employees rushed through the revolving doors, some holding coffee, others glued to their phones. The lobby echoed with the sound of heels clicking on marble floors, briefcases swinging, and urgent whispers about sales, deadlines, and promotions. But few noticed the quiet man standing by the entrance. He wore a simple dark coat, a navy cap, and black gloves. He opened the door for everyone without saying a word. His eyes were kind, though a little tired. He didn't have a badge. He wasn't part of the security staff, but he smiled every time someone walked past him. No one knew this man was Keanu Reeves. A few people gave him odd looks. A few rolled their eyes. One junior analyst whispered to her friend, "He's been here all week. Doesn't say a word. Probably some weird temp the company hired." But no one stopped to ask his name. No one said thank you, not even Claire Westwood. Claire was the regional director of strategy, confident, sharp-tongued, and feared by most junior employees. She believed in numbers, not emotions. Kindness wasn't her language. She stormed past the doorman like he didn't exist, barking orders into her Bluetooth earpiece. Keanu opened the door gently for her. She didn't even glance at him. What no one knew was that Keanu was there for a reason. He had spent months preparing for this moment. This building, this company, and these people, they were connected to a tragedy he had once witnessed quietly from the shadows. No lawsuit, no headlines, but a man had died. A man who was ignored, mocked, and finally pushed out by this very firm. His name was Timothy Hale, and he used to work here. Timothy was a janitor. He had cleaned the offices for 12 years. He never missed a shift. One day he slipped and hurt his back carrying a heavy cart that was overfilled due to a staffing cut. Claire, the same director, had denied his medical request. The company replaced him within 3 days. No one checked on him again. He died 6 weeks later in a rundown apartment. Timothy was a friend of Keanu's, one of the only people who treated him like a real person on the set of a small charity film Keanu had done years ago. Timothy gave him his first motorcycle, gloves. He once told Keanu, "A good man never forgets kindness." And Keanu didn't. He had never made a scene about it. But he had never forgotten that cold look Claire gave Timothy when he begged her to listen. Now, standing by the door of that same company, Keanu was about to change everything. But he didn't come with lawsuits. He came with eyes wide open and a plan. At noon, a young woman named Jessica walked in. She wore old shoes and carried a worn-out messenger bag. Her resume was clutched tightly in one hand. She had an interview with the company. Her brother was sick, and they needed the income. Her face looked nervous, hopeful. As she reached the door, a gust of wind nearly blew her resume out of her hands. Keanu caught it gently before it hit the ground. "You dropped this," he said softly. She blinked. "Thank you. Good luck in there," he added with a smile. Jessica smiled back. "Thanks, mister." It was the first time anyone had spoken to him kindly since he arrived. Inside the office, Claire reviewed Jessica's resume and scoffed. "University dropout. No corporate experience. Do you even know how demanding this place is?" Jessica nodded. "I do. I'm a fast learner. I just need a chance." Claire didn't even look at her. "We don't offer chances here. We offer results." Jessica left the interview room in silence. Her eyes watered, but she wiped them quickly before anyone saw. Keanu watched her leave from the glass lobby doors. He didn't say anything, but something inside him shifted. The next morning, a strange email arrived in the inbox of AltaView Holdings, CEO Martin Dressner. It was from a private account, simple and short. "Watch the doorman closely." Martin ignored it at first, but by noon, another message came. "He knows." Panic slowly spread inside the walls of AltaView. Claire noticed a change. Martin started calling emergency board meetings. Someone reported that the building had more security cameras suddenly activated. And still, Keanu stood at the door, holding it open for everyone, just like before. But one man had been watching Keanu closely. His name was Raj. He worked in IT. No one remembered his birthday. No one knew he played the violin. But Raj noticed things. He saw how the doorman used his left hand more often. He saw the way Keanu scanned the lobby silently. And then one night, Raj froze as he watched a security feed showing the doorman entering a restricted server room without a keycard. The room had been locked. Raj ran the footage again. The lock blinked green before Keanu touched it. He wasn't supposed to have access. No one without level 5 clearance could enter. Only the board and the founder had that. Raj turned pale. Who was this man? He opened his browser and typed Keanu Reeves into the image search. He stared at the screen, then stared at the security feed. His jaw dropped. The next morning, Raj approached Keanu, carefully, nervously. "Sir," he said softly, "why are you here?" Keanu turned slowly. He didn't pretend anymore. He simply said, "To remind them what they forgot." Raj whispered, "Should I tell them?" Keanu looked him in the eye. "Not yet." Meanwhile, Claire was reviewing documents that didn't make sense. Files were vanishing. Backup drives were being reformatted. Legal memos she signed months ago now showed strange annotations. Someone was accessing internal complaints filed years ago, including Timothy Hale's. Her hands trembled. That evening, Martin stormed into the lobby. "Who is this man at the door?" he barked. Security shrugged. "We thought he was your hire." Martin turned red with rage. "He's not. Get rid of him now." But as they approached Keanu, something unexpected happened. The power flickered. The lights dimmed. All screens across the building turned black. Then a single sentence appeared on every screen in white text. "You forgot your humanity." Employees gasped. Claire turned pale. Martin nearly fell over. Keanu was gone from the lobby. No one saw him leave. But at exactly 7:03 p.m., a breaking news alert hit every major outlet. A whistleblower had released internal documents from Altaview Holdings. It included mistreatment reports, illegal firings, and millions in covered-up penalties. Anonymous. Sources had already confirmed the data was authentic. The source? Unknown. But Raj knew. Jessica, sitting at home with her sick brother, got a call from a law firm saying she'd been offered a new role at a startup funded by a private investor. Full salary, health insurance from day one, training included. The Oz. Investor's name was not listed, but the note attached read, "He said you deserved a chance." As the news rolled on and chaos erupted inside Altaview, Claire sat at her desk staring at an envelope that had been left there. Inside was a photo, a smiling man in janitor's uniform. Timothy Hale. With a handwritten note. "A good man never forgets kindness." And as her hands shook, footsteps echoed outside her door. They were getting closer. The man behind the silence. The next morning, the building stood quieter than usual. Gone were the cheerful hallway chuckles and the usual clicking of confident shoes. Instead, a heavy silence blanketed the space like fog. Dense, uncomfortable, almost suffocating. Claire Westwood sat motionless in her office, her fingers still resting on the edges of the photo left behind. Timothy Hale's gentle eyes stared back at her, and no matter how she turned the picture, she couldn't escape his gaze. Outside her frosted glass walls, people were whispering, not about profits or mergers, but about the doorman. "He just vanished," someone whispered in the break room. "One second he was there, the next, gone." "You think he really was him?" another voice asked. "Keanu Reeves? That can't be real." But Raj knew, and his mind hadn't stopped racing since their brief encounter. As head of IT, he'd seen countless breaches and glitches over the years, but nothing like this. Whoever Keanu really was, or whatever resources he had, he wasn't just a doorman with a grudge. He had access no one else did, not even Martin. And that terrified Raj more than anything. Raj sat at his workstation, pulling log after log from the security servers. Deep in the digital backend, buried under layers of encryption, he found a trace signature. one that matched a private network often used by investigative journalists and whistleblowers. Raj had read about this before, a tool called Ghost Frame, untraceable, impossible to intercept, used only by elite-level coders with unlimited resources, and it had been activated from within the building. That meant Keanu hadn't hacked in remotely. He had walked straight into the system from inside, and no one stopped him. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Keanu Reeves stood in front of a modest building that used to be a community center. Paint peeled from the edges, the glass was cracked, and the sign above it read, "Under renovation." Keanu looked at it quietly for a moment, then stepped inside. Tools lay scattered across the floor. Old wooden chairs sat piled in a corner, but in the center of the room was a woman with silver hair and a tool belt around her waist. "You came," she said without turning around. "I said I would," Keanu replied softly. She turned, wiping sweat from her brow. Her name was Gloria. Once a counselor, she had helped dozens of janitors, custodians, and low-income workers in the downtown district when no one else would listen. She had also been Timothy Hale's friend. After his death, she tried to file a case, but her center lost funding the same week her complaint was submitted. They said it was budget reallocation. She called it sabotage. Keanu had promised her that one day, the truth would come out. "They know now," he said. Gloria nodded. "But do they feel it?" "They will." He stepped forward and laid down a folder filled with documents. Inside were names, photos, pay cuts, incident reports, and handwritten letters that had been discarded and never read, all from people like Timothy, workers who gave their lives to a system that never cared back. "This is what's left of their silence," Keanu said. "But we're going to give it a voice." Gloria looked at him with tired but determined eyes. "How?" Keanu looked around the room. "We rebuild this place, we make it louder than any boardroom, and then we let them speak." Back at AltaView Holdings, Claire stood in front of a boardroom filled with uneasy executives. Martin wasn't there. He hadn't shown up since the night the screens went black. Rumors were swirling. Some said he fled the city. Others claimed he was in legal meetings with government officials. The truth was more complicated. Martin was hiding, from the media, from the investors, and maybe even from himself. Claire, however, had no choice but to lead. "We are not responsible for a man's personal vendetta," she declared. "We are a business. We make decisions based on logic, not feelings." A young assistant at the far end of the table raised her hand timidly. "But what if our logic was wrong?" The room went quiet. Claire's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "I mean," the assistant continued nervously, "what if the people we dismissed, the janitors, the temps, the security guys, what if they were the reason this company even ran smoothly in the first place?" Claire turned sharply. "We hired them. We paid them. We don't owe them more than what was in their contract. We owe them dignity," came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Jessica stepped into the room holding a file. Her hair was tied back and her clothes looked different, neater, more confident. She wasn't dressed for an interview this time. She was dressed to be heard. "You," Claire hissed. "You were rejected." "Yes," Jessica replied calmly. "And then someone else offered me a seat at their table. And now I'm here to return the favor." She placed the file on the table. Inside were photos of janitors cleaning collapsed stairwells, reports showing long hours without proper safety training, complaints that never got escalated, and Keanu's name wasn't on any of it. "Who gave you this?" Claire asked, her voice cracking. "Does it matter?" Jessica said. "Because while you were throwing people away, someone else was listening. Someone who knows that being human matters more than being in charge." Suddenly, phones in the boardroom began vibrating. One after the other. Dozens of notifications appeared at once. The story had gone viral. A major publication had just released a full exposé with employee interviews, surveillance screenshots, and leaked emails. The title read, "The Doorman Who Broke the Glass Ceiling, a Silent Rebellion Against Corporate Cruelty." And then came the kicker. Anonymous sources close to actor Keanu Reeves confirm his involvement. The boardroom erupted. People stood up. Legal counsel whispered frantically. Claire backed away from the table, eyes wide, but Jessica stayed calm. The world's watching now, and you can't erase this. Elsewhere, Raj stared at the trending story, stunned, but a message popped up on his screen. Thank you for noticing what others ignored. Raj smiled faintly. Later that night, Claire walked alone through the empty building. She entered the janitor's closet. It was clean, silent, and smelled faintly of bleach. On the shelf sat an old rusted mop bucket. She sat down beside it and placed Timothy's photo on her lap. I didn't forget you, she whispered, almost like a prayer. A soft voice replied behind her, but you looked away. She turned. Keanu stood in the doorway. Claire couldn't speak. He stepped forward and sat across from her on the floor. Why did you come? She asked, to see if there's still something worth saving. And? She whispered. Keanu looked around. It depends on what happens next. He stood slowly, then walked away, leaving her in the silence. But just before he turned the corner, he said without looking back, if you want to fix this, start by remembering who you walked past. And then he was gone again. The reckoning begins. The sun barely rose above the skyline when the first protesters arrived. By 8 a.m., a quiet crowd had gathered outside Altaview Holdings. Former workers, journalists, and ordinary people holding handwritten signs. We are not invisible, one read. Another said, Justice for Timothy. The lobby windows reflected, not just their silhouettes, but something the company hadn't faced in years, consequences. The doorman's disappearance had sparked something deeper than curiosity. It had ignited a movement. Inside, Claire Westwood paced like a trapped animal. The board had gone into damage control mode. Emails flew like bullets. The PR team worked overtime, drafting a soulless apology letter that used words like miscommunication, temporary oversight, and corporate values. Claire read the draft and tore it in half. We can't spin this, she said to a stunned assistant. Not this time. In her private office, the once unshakable executive stood by the window, arms folded, watching the people outside. For the first time in years, she felt small. Not in terms of power, but in spirit. Something inside her chest had started cracking, like a frozen lake under too much pressure. And what terrified her most wasn't the protest or even the looming lawsuits. It was the sound of her own conscience waking up. She remembered Timothy now, not just the janitor, but the man, the quiet smile he had. The day he brought flowers to a secretary who lost her husband. The time he covered another janitor's shift without asking for extra pay. Claire had told herself for years that those moments weren't her concern, that she was hired to make decisions, not friends. And now, every decision she made felt like a stone in her throat. Across the city, in a quiet neighborhood far from the chaos, KeanuReeves sat in a humble kitchen, sipping tea. The room was warm and old-fashioned, with walls covered in photos of everyday people. Workers, bus drivers, waitresses, teachers. The woman sitting across from him was named Nona. She had been Timothy Hale's sister. She reached across the table and placed her hand gently over Keanu's. I saw the news, she said. I knew it was you. Keanu gave her a soft, apologetic look. I waited too long. No, she replied. You waited until they would hear it. That's different. He nodded. Then he placed a flash drive on the table. This is everything else. More names, more stories. It's not just about Timothy. Nona looked at it, tears forming in her eyes. What do we do with it? We don't, Keanu said. They do. The ones who were silenced. Meanwhile, Raj was no longer hiding. He had set up a digital portal, anonymous, secure, and encrypted. He called it the Threshold, a place where workers from across the country could submit their stories, files, pay records, and mistreatment reports. And within 48 hours, over 400 entries had flooded in. From nurses, from janitors, from fast food workers and mechanics and caregivers. Some submitted video testimonies. Others sent photos of injuries, unfair termination letters, and pay stubs that showed decades of work with no raises. The portal had a single tagline: "The door is open. Step through." By the end of the week, the threshold had been featured on 3 major news channels. The storm was no longer confined to AltaView. Back inside the company, things began to collapse. Investors started withdrawing. Clients backed out of contracts. One by one, senior executives resigned, claiming they had no prior knowledge. But Claire didn't resign. Instead, she walked into the company's HR wing, an area she hadn't stepped into in over 4 years, and asked to see every complaint that had ever been filed under her leadership. The HR director, a tired man in his late 50s, raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure?" he asked. Claire nodded. "Even the ones we were told to ignore?" "Especially those." He handed her a thick binder. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, she found page after page of complaints, some small, others horrifying. A single page made her hand tremble. It was from a woman named Carla, a receptionist who had written, "I don't feel safe around my supervisor. He leans too close, touches my shoulder when he talks. No one listens when I report it." The note had a red stamp that read, "Non-critical, Carla," had been fired 2 months later for underperformance. Claire read until her eyes burned. She didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't speak. She stayed locked in her office with the blinds closed and read every word. And somewhere between page 78 and 79, something inside her broke. She walked to the lobby and found Raj. "You run the threshold, don't you?" Raj froze. "I'm not here to stop you," Claire said. "I want to help." "You?" "I want to open our own doors. I want every current and former employee who ever worked here to be able to access their files, their complaints, their records. No more secrecy." Raj stared at her, trying to read her face. "Why now?" "Because I looked away," she said, her voice cracking. "And someone stood in that doorway long enough to make me see it." Raj didn't speak, but slowly he nodded, while Claire tried to clean up her own corner of the world. Keanu had moved on to the next step. With the help of Gloria and Nona, he organized a community forum at the newly restored center. They didn't advertise it. No press, no headlines, just flyers left quietly in coffee shops, buses, and community clinics. The flyer simply read, "We listen, we remember, we rebuild." On the night of the gathering, nearly 80 people showed up, some old, some young. Some wore suits, others wore aprons, but every face held a story, and they shared them, one by one. There was a school janitor who had never had a paid vacation in 20 years, a single mother who worked triple shifts at a nursing home and got fired for falling asleep in the break room, a college student who took a warehouse job and lost a finger in a machine that had no safety guard. Keanu didn't speak much. He listened, and when the stories ended, he stood in the center of the room and said, "You were never invisible. They just never looked." The room fell silent. Some cried, some clapped, but all of them for the first time felt seen. Then a man in a worn hoodie stood and said, "What now?" Keanu replied, "We don't burn buildings. We build better ones." And so the plan changed. The next day, Jessica announced something on her new company's social media page. A fund to help mistreated workers find new paths, training, legal advice, job placement, and mental health support. All backed by a silent investor. People started guessing, but no one confirmed. In the days that followed, Keanu visited 3 other companies, not with rage, but with presence. He stood quietly at each location, by the door, just like before. And somehow, the story always followed. A movement was being born, not led by a celebrity or a politician, but by kindness in disguise, by a man who knew how to wait, how to watch, and when to act. And at AltaView Holdings, the final reckoning had yet to arrive, because the board had just received a formal letter from the Federal Labor Department. An investigation had been opened. It included attachments from the threshold, and the last page simply said, "A good man never forgets kindness, neither do we." letter that shook the walls, the letter came without warning. Thick, official, stamped with a federal seal that sent a chill through the boardroom the moment it landed. Claire sat at the head of the long oak table, her face pale, hands folded tightly, listening as legal counsel read aloud. The words echoed through the room like a funeral bell. To the directors of ActsOfKindness Holdings, this letter serves as formal notification of an open investigation into systemic labor abuse, unlawful termination practices, and obstruction of workplace injury claims. As the list went on, some board members shifted in their seats, others whispered in tight huddles, but Claire didn't move. She just kept her eyes on the table in front of her. She had known this day would come, ever since the moment she looked into Keanu Reeves's eyes inside that janitor's closet. But now that it was here, it felt heavier than she imagined. Realer. Her lawyer advised her not to speak, not to admit anything. But Claire wasn't thinking about courtrooms or reputations. She was thinking about Carla, about Timothy, and the dozens of faces buried in that thick HR binder. Faces she had walked past. Faces she had signed off on firing. Faces that now lived in her memory like ghosts that refused to be silent. Outside the building, reporters had arrived. The story had caught fire. This wasn't just about a company anymore, it had become a cultural spark. Headlines like "The Doorman Who Cracked the Towers of Power" and "Kindness Strikes Back" spread like wildfire. People were no longer just sharing stories. They were organizing. Teachers from Ohio started their own portal modeled after the Threshold. Grocery store workers in Texas walked out in silent protest, placing a single mop outside their doors in memory of Timothy Hale. Keanu never said a word to the press, but he didn't need to. The silence had become his voice, and people were listening. Back at the restored community center, Gloria was overwhelmed. Volunteers came from all over, lawyers offering free consultations, therapists donating hours of their time, retired workers bringing coffee and folding chairs, and at the heart of it all, Keanu Reeves stood like a calm lighthouse in the storm. He didn't claim credit. He didn't stand on stage. He simply showed up, helped where needed, shook hands, listened, always listened. Nona, watching from the doorway one afternoon, turned to Gloria and said, "He's not trying to be a hero." Gloria nodded. "He's trying to finish a promise." But finishing that promise would require one more piece, the one still hiding in the shadows. Martin Dresner. The former CEO had disappeared after the story broke. Media said he was in South America. Others said he checked into a private rehab clinic. But Raj knew better. Through a digital breadcrumb trail left behind in old corporate databases, Raj found a location. A private estate just 2 hours north of the city, nestled in a quiet forest compound known only to the most elite. Keanu didn't hesitate. He drove himself up the winding hills, alone, without cameras, without backup. He knew this confrontation had to happen, not for revenge, but for closure. Martin was the architect of everything that happened at ActsOfKindness. He created the system. Claire had enforced it, yes, but Martin was the one who built the blueprint for cruelty. And Keanu needed to look him in the eyes. The estate was large but eerily empty. A stone path led to a heavy wooden door that opened before Keanu even knocked. Martin stood in a linen shirt, glass of wine in hand, his hair more silver than before. He looked older, thinner, more hollow. "I figured you'd come," he said, stepping aside. Keanu walked in without a word. They sat in a sunroom that overlooked acres of private land. Birds chirped outside. The air was calm, but inside, the tension between them could have shattered glass. "You think you've won, don't you?" Martin asked, sipping his wine. "You think this movement will last?" "It's not a movement," Keanu said. "It's a memory that finally got its voice back." Martin scoffed. "You ruined me, my name, my legacy." Keanu leaned forward, voice low. "You ruined yourself, I just opened the door." "So what now?" Martin asked. "You want an apology? You want me to cry on camera? Confess everything?" Keanu looked at him for a long time, then said, "I want you to say Timothy's Name, just once, say it, Martin blinked. His jaw tightened. He worked for you 12 years, Keanu said, each word heavy. He died alone because you made him feel replaceable. Not because he was injured, but because he was ignored. Martin stared at the floor. The silence stretched. Then, in the faintest whisper, he said, Timothy Hale. Keanu stood. Remember it, because that name will outlive yours. He walked out of the estate, leaving Martin alone in his glass kingdom. Meanwhile, Claire faced her own test. The federal labor investigators had arrived. They set up in a quiet conference room asking for files, emails, and interviews. Claire had a choice. Deny everything, point fingers, or finally do what was right. She walked into the room and handed them her own resignation letter. I won't fight you, she said. But I will cooperate, fully. The lead investigator, a stern woman with tired eyes, asked, Why the change of heart? Claire took a deep breath. Because someone waited by the door long enough for me to see the truth. Her testimony was damning. She named names, outlined years of practices the company had buried. And when she left the building for the last time, she didn't look back. Outside, someone had left a single mop resting against the wall. Claire stopped. She placed a small white flower on top of it. In that moment, she wasn't a director. She was just a person trying to make things right. The next morning, Raj launched a new update on the threshold. A live map of companies across the country that had begun to change their practices. Green dots meant progress. Yellow meant pending. Red meant danger. And for the first time, AltaView Holdings turned green. People cheered in the comments. And at the very bottom of the page, a small quote glowed softly in gray. He held the door so we could walk through. Anonymous, back at the community center. Keanu watched as a little girl helped set up chairs for the next forum. She smiled at him, gap-toothed and full of wonder. Are you the movie guy? She asked. Keanu smiled. Sometimes. My mom says you're a hero. Keanu knelt beside her. Your mom's the hero. She kept going when no one saw her. The girl nodded, then ran off laughing. Gloria approached Keanu quietly. What now? Keanu looked at the open door behind her. Now, he said softly, we help the next one through. The deeper rot the storm that started at AltaView Holdings had grown into something far greater than Keanu Reeves, far greater than Claire, Jessica, or even Timothy Hale's memory. What began as one man silently holding a door had now turned into a national reflection. Across cities and states, companies scrambled to rewrite their employee policies. Some genuinely changed, others faked change, and a few, those with deeper secrets, started covering their tracks. Fast, Keanu watched, it all from a distance, his eyes heavy but focused. He hadn't returned to the spotlight. No press interviews, no photos, no speeches. He still spent most mornings sweeping the steps of the restored community center or quietly assisting volunteers. But something had shifted in him. The past few weeks had opened old wounds and unearthed something darker. A pattern he couldn't ignore. One evening, Raj visited him. He carried a thick folder under his arm, his face tense with unease. They sat on a wooden bench near the edge of the center's small garden, surrounded by soft orange light from the setting sun. Raj opened the folder and laid out several printed screenshots, internal memos, and source code logs. There's something you need to see, he said. Keanu scanned the pages, his brow furrowed. These aren't from AltaView, Raj continued. They're from a company called Viridian Industries. Looks clean on the surface, no headlines, no protests. But their fingerprints are all over this. He pointed to a series of digital trails, shared contractors, ghost payroll systems, shell firms, and at the bottom of it all, a familiar name appeared. AltaView Analytics subcontracted to Viridian Systems. Executive contact Linnea Caldwell. Keanu's face changed the moment he read that name. Linnea Caldwell. A name from a time before all this. She wasn't just another executive. She had been the brain behind the system AltaView used to evaluate and silently eliminate inefficiencies. She didn't just advise companies on profits, she taught them how to cut emotional overhead. Timothy Hale's file had carried her digital watermark. Her voice was never public, but her influence had shaped boardroom culture across dozens of corporations. If AltaView was the sword, Linnea had been the hand that sharpened it, and now she had disappeared from public view. But Raj had tracked her. "She's in Dallas now," Raj said, running a consultancy firm under a different name. Quiet, off the radar, but still advising companies on operational risk, which we both know is code for firing the vulnerable. Keanu said nothing. He stared into the trees. Raj asked, "Do we go after her?" Keanu stood slowly. "We show the world the hand behind the curtain." Days later, Claire was called to testify under oath in a closed-door federal session. Her cooperation had opened many doors, but now the agents wanted to know about external influences, consultants, off-record meetings, silent partners. Claire, no longer shackled by fear or image, told them everything. She spoke of Linnea Caldwell. She explained how meetings would happen in hotels under fake names, how Linnea never signed anything directly but always left behind exact instructions for compliance strategies. The federal investigators leaned forward. They hadn't even known Linnea existed. A week later, a subpoena was issued. But Linnea was already on the move. She had fled to a private estate in Arizona, one surrounded by high walls, drones, and encrypted communications. She knew how to disappear. That was her gift. But what she didn't count on was a quiet force tracking her. Not with weapons, not with hackers, but with the truth. Keanu didn't go alone this time. Gloria, Raj, Jessica, and even Claire, now divorced from her old title, traveled together. It wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. They arrived in the desert with no cameras, just purpose. At the gate, a tall security guard stopped them. Keanu stepped forward and simply said, "Tell her KeanuReeves is here." An hour passed. Then the gates opened. Linnea stood inside, poised, her face cold and unreadable. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. She looked like a shadow that had learned to stand upright. "You shouldn't have come," she said. Keanu nodded. "We came because no one else ever did." Linnea laughed softly. "You think this is about me? I just gave them the tools. They chose to use them." Gloria stepped forward. "You taught them how to erase people like Timothy." "I taught them to survive," Linnea snapped. "Business is war. I didn't create cruelty. I just removed the shame from using it." Jessica's voice trembled. "You made it normal." "No," Linnea said coldly. "I made it profitable." Keanu finally spoke. "And now we're going to make it visible." Linnea's eyes flickered. "What are you planning?" Keanu pulled a small recorder from his coat. "This entire conversation is being streamed to a live forum. A few thousand viewers right now. Probably more in a minute." For the first time, Linnea's face changed. Her mask cracked, and then, one by one, others spoke. Claire confessed to the moments she followed Linnea's strategy, and the cost of that obedience. Raj explained how her systems buried real complaints inside algorithmic walls. Gloria told the story of how her center was defunded weeks after refusing a proposal Linnea's team offered, and Jessica told the world how a single file marked low potential almost kept her from feeding her brother. The livestream went viral in less than an hour. Millions watched. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Raw. Human. A mirror that showed the side of society no one wanted to admit existed. By morning, Linnea's firm lost its licenses. Her name was dragged from the shadows into full daylight. But more than that, people began asking real questions. Who decides value? What is dignity worth in numbers? What does it cost when kindness is no longer part of the formula? KeanuReeves didn't speak to the press. Not then. Not after. He returned quietly to the community center where he greeted a new volunteer that week, a former HR manager from another major firm who quit his job and said, "I want to fix what I helped break." And as the threshold platform reached 1 million stories submitted, Raj added a new section. Forgiveness logs. a space for those ready to confess, to repair, to make amends. Not everyone who caused harm was evil. Some were just asleep. But now, thanks to a quiet doorman with tired eyes, the world had been shaken awake, and yet Keanu knew. The hardest part was still ahead, because systems don't die quietly. The last door, it had been 72 days since Keanu Reeves first stood outside the glass tower of Altaview Holdings, dressed like a doorman, silent and unseen. Now, the movement he quietly sparked had grown into something far beyond anything the world expected. But as headlines shifted, as companies promised change, and as communities gathered to heal, one final truth remained buried, untouched, hidden beneath layers of silence. Even Keanu hadn't dared face. Not until now. The restored community center was holding its largest gathering yet. Volunteers had transformed the old basketball court into a makeshift hall, lit warmly with soft lamps and decorated with photos of real people: janitors, receptionists, caretakers, mechanics, factory workers. Stories printed on thick cardstock lined the walls like a living museum. It wasn't just an event. It was a reckoning written in compassion. Hundreds had arrived. Claire Westwood walked through the door alone, without her old confidence, but with something new in her step: humility. Raj was setting up the livestream station, checking wires and nodding to interns. Jessica stood near the welcome table, handing out programs, her brother by her side, finally healthy. Gloria arranged chairs and spoke softly to an older man in a wheelchair, thanking him for his decades of service at a local school where no one had remembered his name until now. But everyone waited for one person. Keanu Reeves entered not from the front, but through the side. Quietly, as always. He wore the same coat from that first day. His hair was pulled back. His face looked calm. But something behind his eyes had changed, like a door inside him had finally creaked open. He stepped onto the stage. No microphone, no podium, just him. The audience grew still, and the live stream lit up with viewers from around the world. Keanu didn't speak right away. He looked at the faces in the room, the hopeful, the grieving, the newly awakened. He took a deep breath. "I want to tell you about someone," he said. His voice was low, but the room leaned in, the silence powerful. His name was Lucas Hale. He was 8 years old. My godson. Gasps rippled quietly. Even Gloria looked up, surprised. She knew Timothy Hale had a son, but the connection to Keanu had never been made public. Keanu continued. "Timothy Hale wasn't just my friend. He was my family. Years ago, on a film set where no one looked at the janitorial crew, he handed me a wrench after I dropped one. No cameras, no audience. He just smiled and said, 'Looks like you needed a second chance.'" He paused, his jaw tightening. Timothy was the reason I started riding motorcycles. He was the one who taught me to change my oil. And he was the one who asked me, before he passed, to look after Lucas. Keanu looked toward the back of the room. A young boy, now a teenager, stood with tears in his eyes. "Lucas is here tonight, because kindness didn't end with Timothy. It began with him." The room was breathless. "But I failed him," Keanu said, his voice cracking, "not because I didn't care, but because I waited too long. I thought justice would come if I was patient, if I played by the world's rules. I waited for someone else to speak up. And while I waited, Timothy was forgotten. His son was forgotten. By me. By everyone. And that's something I'll never forgive myself for." His hands trembled slightly. But then I remembered what he used to say. "A good man holds the door open, even if no one walks through it." So that's what I did. And then you walked through. Tears filled eyes across the room, not from pity, but from the rawness of truth, from the acknowledgement of deep personal failure wrapped in selfless love. "This movement was never about me," he continued. "It was about seeing people before they disappear, about protecting the ones who hold the world up without applause, and about choosing to be human in a system that punishes you for it." He stepped back. Silence again. Then slowly, applause began, Not loud or frenzied, but steady, honest and full of something rare: respect. Afterward, as people mingled and shared stories, a woman approached Keanu. Her name was Layla. She had once been an assistant at Viridian Industries, Linnea Caldwell's former firm. She handed Keanu a small envelope, her eyes red. "I kept this," she whispered. "I didn't know why. Until now." Inside was a memo, unsigned, marked, "Delete after review." It was a list of people labeled redundant liabilities, dozens of names. At the top, Timothy Hale. Keanu stared at it, then folded it gently and placed it into his coat pocket. "Thank you," he said. "I wish I did more," Layla replied. "You did," he said. "You remembered." The next morning, the Threshold site published a final entry on its front page, a memorial page for those who had been lost, unheard, unseen, discarded. The page had no commentary, no branding, just names. And next to each name, a button that said "Read their story." Over 1 million users clicked in the first 24 hours. Claire, now working for a nonprofit auditing corporate ethics, visited schools, teaching future business leaders how not to forget the people who made the system run. Raj started training low-income students in data protection and ethical tech. Jessica's new company expanded to 3 cities, and Lucas Hale began writing a book. Its title, The Man by the Door. As for Keanu, he returned one last time to the steps of the AltaView building, not to make a statement, not for a stunt, just to remember. He placed a single flower at the door, then turned away, disappearing into the morning crowd. Some people walked past him without noticing, but others stopped and opened the door for someone else.